You're watching the History Fellow channel. In this video we're looking at the Battle of Island No. 10, Part 2. The gunboats and mortars arrived on March the 15th, and the siege is dated from that time. Pope in New Madrid and Foote upstream at the Bend were kept apart by Island No. 10. From the first they did not agree on how about conducting the operation. Pope wanted immediate action. Foote hoped to subdue the island by a slow process of bombardment. Foote was hampered by ambiguous or even contradictory orders from Halleck, who was distracted at the time by preparations for the advance along the Tennessee River that soon culminated in the Battle of Shiloh. As early as March the 17th, Pope was asking that 2 or 3 gunboats run past the Confederate batteries to enable him to cross the river and trap the entire garrison. Foote demurred, arguing that his boats were not invincible, that a chance-disabling shot would deliver a boat into the Confederate hands, and that gunboat could then threaten all the northern cities along the Mississippi and its tributaries. Foote's thinking was also to have been affected by the wound he received at Fort Donelson, which was not healing properly and kept him in pain and unconscious. For the next 2 weeks, fighting consisted of bombardment of the island at rather long range, mostly conducted by the mortars and occasionally replied to by the Confederate batteries. High expectations that had been held for the mortars were dashed. They did very little harm to the enemy position. The most significant damage incurred in this period was in fact self-inflicted. During a bombardment on March 17th in which the gunboats took part, a gun on the USS St. Louis exploded, killing 3 members of the crew and wounding a dozen others. After Foote had flatly rejected Pope's request that gunboats run past Island No. 10, someone on Pope's staff suggested that perhaps a canal could be cut to enable Union vessels to bypass the batteries. The canal was completed in 2 weeks, but it was not deep enough to provide passage for the gunboats. It proved useful nevertheless, in that transports and supply vessels could use it, so that Pope did not have to depend on land communications. Pope still insisted that he needed a gunboat to cover his projected landing on the Tennessee side of the river. Foote called 2 councils of war among his captains. In the first, on March the 20th, his decision not to risk running past the batteries was confirmed. When Halleck wrote to Foote saying, "Give him, Pope, all the assistance in your power," Foote called a second council on March the 29th. This time Commander Henry Wolk, captain of the USS Carondelet, thought that the risk would be worth the candle and volunteered to take his boat through. Foote gave the necessary orders, and Carondelet was prepared for the run. She was covered with rope, chain, and whatever loose material lay at hand. A coal barge filled with coal and hay was lashed to her side. Her steam exhaust was diverted from the smokestacks to muffle the sound, so then they only had to wait for a sufficiently dark night to make her run. To reduce the danger as much as possible, a raid by sailors in the flotilla and soldiers from the 42nd Illinois Infantry under Colonel George W. Roberts overran Battery No. 1 and spiked its guns on the night of April the 1st. On April the 2nd, the flotilla, including both mortars and gunboats, concentrated its fire on the floating battery, New Orleans. She was hit several times and her mooring lines were parted. She drifted downstream, out of the war. On April the 4th, conditions for running past the remaining batteries were satisfactory. The night was moonless, and after a dark thunderstorm came up, Carondelet made her way downstream and was not discovered until she was abreast of the Confederate Battery No. 2. She might have escaped detection completely had not her smokestacks blazed up. The build-up of soot, no longer dampened by escaping steam, caught fire and revealed her position. The batteries opened, but their fire was inaccurate, and the Carondelet completed the run unscathed. Pope continued to press foot for another gunboat, and 2 nights later USS Pittsburgh made a similar run. Pope now was able to cross the river with his army, without prospect of interference from Confederate gunboats. He could also suppress the enemy fire that may have opposed their landing. On April the 7th, he made his move and sent the gunboats to destroy the batteries at Watson's Landing, the place he had selected for the attack. When this was accomplished, the transports carried the troops across, and the landings proceeded without opposition. A few hours elapsed until McCall was able to decide what to do next. Realizing that his position was hopeless, he put the men on the mainland in motion in the direction of Tiptonville. The motion was detected by Pope's spies, who gave the information to Pope. Pope then diverted his soldiers to Tiptonville, and the operation became a foot race rather than the expected battle. McCall's only hope was that the gunboats would not interfere, but they did, and the retreat of his army was delayed long enough for Pope's men to get to Tiptonville first. The defenders were trapped with no prospect of victory, so McCall decided to surrender. Whilst this was taking place, the demoralized garrison of Island No. 10 surrendered, separately to Flag Officer Foote and his gunboats. The river was then open as far as Fort Pillow. The destruction of the Confederate garrison was complete. Only a few hundred individual soldiers managed to escape by wading over rafting across a Reelfoot Lake and later rejoining the army. The number who were captured became a matter of controversy. Pope asserted in his official reports that he had taken 273 officers and 6,700 private soldiers captive. This is almost certainly a great exaggeration. Confederate records indicate that not more than 5,350 men were present. The number captured would then likely have been less than 4,500. Aside from the prisoners taken, the number of casualties in the entire campaign was very low. From the fall of New Madrid to the surrender at Tiptonville, the Union Army and Navy had lost only 7 men, killed from all causes, 4 missing and 14 wounded. During the entire campaign, losses in the Army of the Mississippi were reported as 8 killed, 21 wounded, and 3 missing. Confederate losses in killed and wounded were not reported, but seem to have been similarly slow. Although Beauregard sought early release for the men captured at Island No. 10, the offer was declined, and several soldiers' wives who had been employed at the island chose to go north into captivity alongside their husbands. About 1,400 of the captured Confederate soldiers, many from the 1st Regiment of Alabama, were transported by railroad to what was previously a Union Army training field in Madison, Wisconsin. This marked the beginning of Camp Randall's use as a prisoner of war camp. From the end of April to the end of May, 140 of the prisoners died at Camp Randall due to its unsanitary conditions and are buried at Confederate rest. Because April 7th was the second day of the far bloodier Battle of Shiloh, the campaign for Island No. 10 soon fell from public notice. It has become memorable principally for the run of the USS Carondelet past the batteries, whose passage marked the introduction of a new tactic in warfare. The use of steam for driving ships meant that they were no longer forced to neutralize fixed defenses or batteries. The tactic later became commonplace in the Civil War. being employed by Farragut at New Orleans, Port Hudson, Vicksburg and Mobile, and by David D. Porter at Vicksburg. Consequently, the value of fixed fortifications was much less, but not completely diminished. The restored nation had to consider this when designing its defense system after 1865. In addition, the impact of season and weather should also be recognized for aiding Union efforts. If the Federals had arrived later in the summer, after the spring, or high water, then their naval options would have been much more limited. No back channel could have been carved out, and Confederate chances for defense or withdrawal likely much improved. If you found the information in this video informative, please feel free to give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more information about various battles of the American Civil War. Thank you very much for listening, and I shall see you in the next video.